Hello and welcome to another episode of Attacking Third, a CBS Sports soccer podcast. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's episode, we have an NWSL 2023 draft coverage, a little bit of a recap episode that we want to go through with everyone. Hello to those of you who are joining us this morning live. If you're in the chat, good morning to you. Quick reminder before we get into all things NWSL Draft. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Please give our videos a thumbs up. YouTube.com/attacking third. You can get all kinds of exclusive NWSL content, previews, recaps, interviews right here with A3. We got a lot to talk about, Lisa. I'm happy to do it with you this morning. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm happy to be doing it with you as well. There is a lot to break down. And we're also going live on Monday morning, which we haven't done in quite a long time. So thanks everyone for getting up this morning and joining us live here on YouTube, because the past several months we've been Tuesday, Thursdays live. And even in season, we're usually like Sunday night or early Monday morning. So we're throwing off the schedule this week because there's a lot to talk about. We've got draft recaps that we want to hit on. We couldn't do it Friday. We were traveling. It's the day after the draft. So we're hitting it today. We've also got a lot this week, Sandra. Like our content plate is incredibly full. We've got U.S. women's national team playing 2 friendlies this week against New Zealand. We've got a lot of news happening. There were so many trades that happened. The draft was phenomenal. Tremendous. It was so great to be there with all the media that covers the league, with CBS broadcasting it, with you, of course, going live from our little back, like changing room, whatever it
I know.
was that we were sitting in, like our locker room. It was great though. I mean, hey, we made it work. Lots of setup, and then I brought it all home. But it was good, and the draft was great. But there were so many things that we didn't even get the chance to hit on while we were doing our live draft recap. And so that's why we're here today, to kind of break everything down, because the entire draft day was packed full of new information about the NWSL, about the league, about expansion, about VAR, about trades, about salary caps, about so many things that happened. So this is kind of our breakdown episode of all of that, as well as the draft itself, and kind of which teams won, which teams lost, because hey, there's always a winner and there's always a loser, and we got some big winners and big losers throughout this draft for sure.
Love to talk about those winners and those losers. Sports, y'all. Let's talk about some winners and some
Sport.
losers. Yeah, no, happy to be here,
I
hanging out with
love dubbing
Lady.
someone a loser too. I love being like, you're a loser, you're a winner, right? Like it's so fun. It's that competitive
Energy,
spirit.
energy this Monday morning. Yeah, no, happy to be here this morning with you and with everybody to chat all things NWSL as always. Happy MLK Day to
Hmm.
everyone. If you got the day off, I would just encourage
Oh.
everyone to maybe try to find an act of service today.
Mhm.
It's always a good way to celebrate, I think. So let's get cracking into perhaps maybe some of the news bits, right? That took place along the way of draft day specifically. I wish I could say it was draft week, but draft day itself was pretty heavy in terms of news that was cycling around, whether it was the trades that we were reacting to or the press conference from NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman. So some cool things coming out within what is essentially a state of the league address. First one for Berman in 2023. Felt appropriate that it took place on draft day, her first NWSL draft with the league. Um, I opened up. You and I were there, Lisa, but
Mhm.
I recall listening to this, and she opened up this press conference, obviously touching on the sanctions and the corrective actions that were recently put out by the league, because that was probably, from the league side of things, one of the bigger news components for them as they headed into draft week. So she kind of did the smart thing and touched on that immediately. Brought up again how this process for the league has been a three-pronged approach when it came to the joint team investigation. When you and I were in DC for the NWSL championship, she talked about that then, and only being in the first phase of that three-pronged approach. The first was seeking the truth through the investigation, and now they are turning the next page on the second part of that, which was the corrective action and the sanction. And we touched a little bit about that when they initially dropped in a previous episode, and some of that included permanent bans. There are 4 coaches who are permanently banned. There are massive team fines, any beginning at 1.5 million to 200,000. And I think it's really important to just sort of, to have heard her touch on that, because now it sort of feels like the league wants to really focus on systemic reform, which is the third part of their three-pronged approach to the joint team investigation. And it was cool to hear her talk about that, and refer to it essentially as something that's going to be forever. Like systemic reform
Right.
is going to be a thing that is ongoing. It's not going to be something that is solved overnight, especially in this league, that when we're looking at things in hindsight, kind of has a decade to sort of make up for, on top of trying to move forward. So it was good to hear
Yeah.
her sort of touch on all that.
Yeah, and the fact that she did talk about, as you mentioned, those 3 prongs, and I think it's very important to, kind of reflect on the timeline of all of this, because, the results and everything that came out, about the corrective action came out before the draft. They put that in place, what coaches were gonna be banned, what, front office and assistant coaches were going to be, permanently banned versus temporarily banned, what fines were going to be put on the leagues. That happened all before the draft. That way, this NWSL draft, specifically the event, could signify the turning of the chapter and could signify the start of that third prong that NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman was talking about in facts of systemic reform, and that it's not a chapter, but instead it's forever moving forward into the future. And we're done with everything before: seeking the truth, the corrective action, and now it's the systemic reform. And I thought that was really interesting. She talked so much about how the positive future and how it was a new chapter, and how that today was a new beginning, moving forward, about everything that could be done. But in terms of the media that was there and present with us at the conference for Jessica Berman, or virtually there was a lot of questions about, okay, these teams have a lot of fines: 1.5 million for Chicago Red Stars, 1 million for Portland, and then so on and so forth. When are they due? How are they going to be due? Where do these fines, where are the players going to see them reflected in it? And Berman wasn't sure of the timeline, but she was like, they're going to pay, right? We think they're going to pay. So like the timeline, we're not that worried about. She has no reason to think that any of these teams wouldn't pay those fines. But the fact that the league plans to use the fines from those teams into the systemic reform to directly benefit the players, working with subject matters and experts in the space. Berman talked about to talk about policy reform, as well as getting input directly from the Players Association on how to best use that money. So I think that was really important for her to touch on when the money is coming and what it's going to be used for. And the fact that it is directly going to benefit the players is huge, and what these players deserve.
Yeah, it was good to start off I think the conference like that. And when you listen to these things, you also get updates on other areas, and we heard a lot of our great colleagues ask good questions. And one of the biggest ones, I think, obviously, was salary cap. Folks wanted to know how 23 looked, as the season is right around the corner, really. But the commissioner mentioning that salary caps have increased by 25% to 1.375 million. Allocation money has also increased to 600,000. And those are pretty big numbers, I think, even just in the allocation money sense, when you think back to its introduction, which was just a few years ago. This is not something that has been around with the league for a long time. I believe it got introduced in 2020, so we're just talking about the third year of existence for teams to utilize. When it got announced, it was initially $300,000, and now that's increased to $600,000. So always good to hear the increase for cap and allocation money as well.
Yeah, and the way that that works, I know I get questions on Twitter and everything like that. In terms of salary cap and then allocation money is used to allocate money towards salaries so that teams can stay under the salary cap. It sounds like, when I say it like that, it sounds so basic, but I'm telling you, people have asked me all the time, what is the difference between salary cap? What is allocation money? What do we use it for? Because we see teams making trades for allocation money all the time. It basically just is like a loophole to get around the salary cap. You see it in MLS. It obviously happens in the NWSL. It's common in terms of that. But there's also, when Jessica Berman was talking about this and all the financial improvements of the year, including salary caps and allocation, she talked about the teams and the individual clubs on their own local level are doubling and tripling their investment into the teams, whether that's coaching staffs, facilities, or other areas that the players deserve in order to perform at the highest level. And she even referenced the trade that happened earlier ahead of the draft between North Carolina, or between free agent Debinha, Brazilian international, in Kansas City, because Debinha is saying, hey, I want to go to Kansas City because they've got great facilities. They've got a NWSL specific stadium that is in the works of being built. And that was a big draw for Debinha to go there. So the fact that a lot of teams are making those investments are really good to see. You talked about how all the media was asking these great questions. This was probably one of my favorite, because everyone remembers back in July 2021, the NWSL announced that they were going to have a rebrand, a new logo, perhaps a new name, just a new rebrand. They were celebrating 10 years of existence. But of course, a lot of other things happened, more important things. So the rebrand got put on the back burner. So it was asked, hey, what's the new brand strategy? When are we going to see a rebrand of the logo, of the name, of the trophies, of anything like that? And that was on her radar. She said, we're looking for a target rebrand, probably not until 2024 to change the logo or anything like that. But as of right now, they've already made a lot of changes within the league, right? They changed the league's executive office's location. They also built out more executive staff right under NWSL Commissioner Berman, many of them reporting directly to Berman, including a chief marketing officer who's focused solely on building a new brand identity in the league. And that's going to start as early as this year with new messaging across the NWSL about what their goal is and what the brand identity of the league wants to be. But we won't see a new logo or anything like that for at least a year or so.
Yeah, she touched on 2024 as a possible starting point. I won't even say that that's going to be its arrival.
Yeah.
That 2024
No,
could
no.
possibly be the starting point for the journey to actual like logo
Yeah,
rebrand
it's
and that.
really hard to do a
Yeah.
rebrand. I mean, we designed our
Yeah.
logo. We talked about rebrands all the time on the business side of things. It's really hard. It's not easy at all.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that within that, that it wasn't so much of like it's important to not just fixate on the fact that there's like a logo that could use a refresh, but she also talked about that there are other ways in which they're going to start focusing on their brand strategy, and that's really around like the messaging of the league that they really want to start there, and those are the first steps that they're going to take in terms of their actual brand strategy. So to look for specific messaging, the community outreach within NWSL markets specifically, that they're going to maybe try to target those areas as early as 2023, and that anything related to actual logos or branding and stuff like that might not even really get touched on until something like 2024. So that was cool to get an update on that. It was also cool to get an update on VAR. It's coming to the NWSL. We know that we did touch on that during last season when the league announced that they were going to add additional cameras to the broadcast and ensure that there were multiple angles for these games, and that maybe sort of becoming the launching point to introduce VAR. So it's going to be in place in start for the 2023 season, kicking off on March 25th. A minimum of 6 cameras at each game. There's going to be additional training of referees, staff, broadcasters, etc. So it's cool to know that we're finally going to get VAR. We'll see how quickly people, we're calling for it, and how quickly they'll change their
I know.
song once it starts getting implemented.
Yeah, once it starts affecting their own personal team that they're
Yeah.
cheering for, they're gonna be like, "Yeah, we don't want VAR anymore." But I think it's really important that the league implement VAR because they realize to grow the league, you have to have those different levels. And to elevate the broadcast this much by having a minimum of 6 cameras at each game is huge. That's such an advantage. And so you have to have 6 cameras for VAR, but those cameras aren't just used for VAR. So you're getting enhanced angles of the game, close ups, slow motion potentially. Like there are so many different aspects of this that just elevates it entirely. They're putting the league is putting their money where their mouth is. They want this to be a league that is enhancing itself, and that's exactly what they're doing for 2023. And in hopes to continue to grow and continue to get bigger, because Jessica Berman also talked about that expansion in the NWSL. We saw 2 new teams in California come in last year for the 2022 season, and there has been talks about growing the league by 2024 by 2 new teams. She talked about how the demand is there for the league to expand however quickly they want. There's a plan set in place for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But also, the league doesn't have a target number of teams. They're not saying we're going to cap it at 14 teams. They want to keep growing to be as profitable and to meet the demand for fans, for smaller markets, for different markets, to grow as much as they can. And she also said that they're hoping to share a little bit more. She said, hey, it might be weeks, it might be days, it might be months, but I'm expecting weeks we'll be able to share a little bit more from you. That's when I was like, all right, Berman, I'm ready. I'm ready to hear more about the expansion teams.
Yeah, I know there's 2 expected on the horizon, and we've been chatting about different markets and what that's going to look like for the league moving forward in 2024. So I'm sure we'll get some updates on that, considering the 2023 season is kicking off soon. But it was also cool to hear the commissioner speak a little bit about the broadcast rights deal for the league, because for folks who don't know, NWSL and CBS broadcast deal will be done at the conclusion of 2023. So it's very cool to sort of see her talk about how there was an exclusive window specifically with CBS for those negotiation periods. And it was really cool to hear her essentially say that there has already been a mutual expressing of between CBS and NWSL to sort of continue their partnership. So we'll see. NWSL is a great league, and we'll see if there's a new update on that moving up. But it was cool to sort of hear that come out of this as well.
Yeah, and the fact that she was pretty transparent about what the league is looking for in broadcast partners, right? She mentioned term, how long the deal would last, the reach, how many viewers it was able to get, and then of course dollars. They said those are the 3 primary pillars behind a media deal, and they want to be as lucrative as possible. And it's crazy to think that at the end of this season, that's when those changes will be made. We just saw it happen with U.S. soccer and their rights going from ESPN and Fox to HBO, because we got U.S. games this week, and people are all in my DMs. Hey, how do I watch this? What do I do? What do I do? Changing of rights is interesting. It can really benefit a league a lot, but it's mostly to benefit a league, right? And to benefit the viewers that are trying to watch the league. You want to make it as easy and as seamless for them as possible.
Coming out of this press conference with Jessica Berman, it was just hours before the NWSL draft actually got started. And coming out of this conference, Lisa, I remember you and I already hearing some things about on the trade wire there, the rumors kind of swirling around. And then sure enough, leading into draft day, we heard some things get announced because that trade window was by hours. It was it closed at 12 p.m. It was going to open up again during the actual trade event. We heard about Gotham FC making their moves just as that window was closing, how they had traded with San Diego Wave for their 13th overall pick, the number 1 pick in the second round. So just little things. But, we wanted to really focus on some of the biggest trades that took place during draft day, because there were a ton that took place on draft day. We got to see, San Diego Wave and Orlando Pride. Maggie Doherty Howard is heading over to San Diego Wave. Paige Monahan is heading over to Racing Louisville. Lynn Williams, right? That's the big name and one of the big trades coming out on draft day. Lynn Williams to Gotham FC for that number 2 overall pick. Diana Ordonez to Houston Dash. Emily Sonnet to OL Reign. Elise Bennett to OL Reign as well. There were, again, ton of player movement, even just within the league already, but on draft day.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, leaving the press conference, it was like, all right, like what's happening in the world of trades right now? Because there was definitely some that were a little surprising, right? I think one for me, I love to see Maggie Doherty Howard going to San Diego Wave. This is a 2-year deal for Doherty Howard, running through the 2024 season. She's spent the last 2 seasons with Orlando Pride, but she started with Washington, then went to Orlando, and I think that it's a really, really good grab. Someone that's been at Orlando for the last 2 years, you look at who she'll be playing alongside in San Diego. That's Taylor Korniak in the midfield. That's Alex Morgan up top. I think Doherty Howard adds a lot of depth to that San Diego team. And also Paige Monahan moving from Gotham to Racing Louisville. This was a trade that I was interested to see how this was going to pan out, because that's what happened first before we found out who else would be going to Gotham, because this is Paige Monahan's a player that saw significant time with Gotham in the front line, playing on the wings, contributing a lot. I think it's a good grab for Racing that a player like Monahan can shore up the attack and have a little bit more experience to that Racing Louisville side. But once the draft started, that's when we started to see some other crazy trades happening. And we talked about it a little bit on draft night, but Lynn Williams to Gotham for the 2nd overall pick. This was massive for Kansas City. We saw it. Kansas City wanted that number 2 pick. They wanted to go with sophomore out of Duke, Michelle Cooper, a forward. And this is the price it was going to be. They sent Lynn Williams to Gotham. We look at the Gotham roster now, and I want to talk to you about this, Sandra, about the front line with Midge Purse, Ifeoma Onumonu, and now you've got Lynn Williams thrown into that mix. Look in the midfield. You've got Christy Mewis. What do you think about this Gotham front line and now seeing Lynn Williams being sent to New Jersey, New York?
Listen, I like the move. I think what you're getting out of Lynn Williams, I think folks seeing the reaction to this trade, I was surprised to sort of see how kind of mixed it was. You're going to find me in the camp of giving Gotham a good grade on their trade day, because I think not only did they add some really good picks, you're talking about getting a United States Women's National Team caliber forward on your team as well. So I think this is great. I think we're also missing Taylor Smith in that equation as well. We're missing Yasmin Ryan in that equation as well. This Yasmin Ryan is a player that they literally
Victoria
just traded for leading up to the draft. So I mean, we have to include her in this draft day equation as well. But just for this actual trade specifically for Lynn Williams, number 2 pick, I thought this was just like, if anything, it just sort of was capping off Gotham's draft day. I think it's a World Cup year, right? So I think that there's going to be some question marks of around that player's availability specifically. There's also, I think, question marks around whether you'll have a Christy Mewis available in 2023, if you'll have a Mitch Purse available in 2023. But I think with the moves that they made, and then you're including Lynn Williams in this, I think this is a good one. I as soon as I heard it, and it was made official, like just hearing the rumors of it, I was like, no way. And then hearing it actually come to life, I was like, yeah, this is actually really, really good for Gotham.
I agree. I think it is really great for Gotham. Gotham had a pretty good draft day, right, in terms of the trades that they got and some of the picks they picked up. But Kansas City, so they lose Lynn Williams. Yes, they get Michelle Cooper in the number 2 draft pick, but they also traded away Elise Bennett on draft day. This was a rookie last year, forward for Kansas City, that had tremendous growth in just one season in the NWSL. Bennett was incredible to watch. I mean, Kansas City had probably one of the best rookie classes last year in 2022 in the league, and largely due in part to someone like Elise Bennett. Yeah, you look at a Jenna Weinbrunner or an Alex Luera, also out of Kansas City, but Elise Bennett got traded to OL Reign for the 23rd overall pick in the draft from Kansas City, and OL Reign traded $150,000 in allocation money to the Current. So KC, they lose Lynn Williams, they lose Elise Bennett. Those are 2 prolific forwards for that KC side. Now, Lynn Williams didn't play that much in 2022. She only played a handful of games at the start of the season, then suffered an injury. But I think Elise Bennett, that's a loss for KC. That's a huge loss for a player like that. But on the other side, OL Reign, to pick up a player like Elise Bennett, that's massive. Imagine what Laura Harvey, head coach at OL Reign, can teach a player like Bennett about the league, about playing alongside Rose Lavelle, Megan Rapinoe, Jess Fishlock. I mean, that's going to be really fun for a young player in Bennett to grow and see herself there. But throughout the trade, I think this was another big one that I heard rumblings of early on before the draft even started. But then Diana Ordonez, forward for North Carolina Courage, gets traded to Houston Dash. This was a trade that at first I was like, whoa, what is North Carolina doing? But I'm going to be honest. I was like, what is North Carolina doing? Why would they lose a player like Diana Ordonez? They've already lost Abinia, and now they lose Ordonez, but Ordonez is from Texas. When North Carolina played at Houston last year, there was like 50 or 60 of Ordonez's family and friends there cheering her on. So I think it's a massive, massive get for Houston. And now we get to see Diana Ordonez alongside Maria Sanchez throughout the World Cup. They're not going anywhere. Alongside Ebony Salmon, Shea Grooms, Sophie Schmidt. Like, Houston is stacking up. They're looking to bolster their roster.
Lisa, this is the winners and losers episode. So yeah, we got to talk about the both sides. Absolutely, Houston's winning in this one. When this trade dropped, I was like, wow, winner, winner right here. Ordonez coming off of a historic Rookie of the Year season, setting a new record for most goals scored by a rookie player, and now gonna head home to Houston, be able to play in front of friends and family. And you look on the other side of that coin, and that's a big loss for a North Carolina Courage side that has not had a great off season. We talked about how they unfortunately weren't able to retain Dabinia in free agency, and now you're losing a piece that folks are maybe pointing to and saying, you know what, you lost Dabinia. There was always going to be that possibility. But hey, you've got some good young pieces to build around. And one of those young pieces was Dan Ordonez. And here's draft day, and that's not the case. And yeah, we heard about how this was a move that North Carolina Courage made in order to accommodate a player's wishes. And while, people might look at that and say, well, good on North Carolina, I'm moving past that. In 2023, Sandra wants to move past that narrative because we've heard that a lot in years prior in NWSL. We've heard about when there are players who make their request, the club that it was requested from paint themselves as, oh, yes, look at us. We have honored a player's wishes to move them. I'm moving past that. Why is a young player asking for a move this early in her career?
She's ready. Why are you honoring it? Why you better be getting something insane if you're honoring that. I mean, I'm going to be honest. If you look at North Carolina, they are a team that needs to get back on the winning side of things. They won the Challenge Cup, but then they didn't even make the playoffs at the end of last year. And I don't know. I would not have let Diana Ordonez go, but I think she is such a stellar athlete and player and goal scorer that I would have held on to her for everything that she's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to close out the night, just when we thought things were settling out, Lisa, this trade actually broke as we were at the draft doing our live show in Philadelphia. Emily Sonnet to OL Reign late in the draft night. We got player to be named, which is something, it's a phrase that they use in light of wanting to ensure that they notify the player involved in the trade. And then very quickly, more reporting that it was possibly Emily Sonnet, and then made official by OL Reign, welcoming her to the squad. So this is another player that they were able to add through their draft trade. So they go from adding in the attack with Elise Bennett to adding in the back line with Emily Sonnet.
This was massive to see Mark Parsons for Washington Spirit sending a player like Emily Sonnet, U.S. women's national team defender. She was with the Spirit for 2 years, helped Spirit lift that NWSL title in 2021, and have her go to OL Reign. 2016, she was the first overall draft pick. This is a player that has a lot of experience internationally along a back line, and she can shore up any back line. And when you look at Washington's roster from last year to this year and heading into a World Cup year, there's going to be a lot of holes throughout July and August when the U.S. and when the World Cup is happening. They're the team in the league that has the most international call-ups, especially for the U.S. Emily Sonnet being one of them. So to kind of send her away, I think that's a big loss for Washington. This is a veteran. After you've already lost Kelly O'Hara to Gotham, you need your back line to be strong and to be tough. Yeah, they've still got Amber Brooks. She's a 10-year veteran, 11-year veteran in the league. Sam Staub, but this is a team or in the back line to lose Emily Sonnet. I think that's a really big loss. Now, OL Reign, on the other hand, they've now picked up Elise Bennett and Emily Sonnet. They're looking pretty happy in the Pacific Northwest right now at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to touch on the trades, or the craziest trades that we thought of the day, just because you have to, when we talk about, winners and losers coming out of draft day, I think you gotta incorporate some of the moves and the trades that some of these teams made when you're sort of giving that overall evaluation. So we're actually going to continue to talk about the NWSL draft. We want to talk about the biggest winners and losers, breaking teams down in terms of who came out on top and who is still has some question marks around them going into the 2023 season. So we're going to talk about all the teams and more right after a quick break.
I am offering you a chance to help bring down the single greatest threat to New Orleans.
I can't do this. There are memories that I just can't bear.
Have I given you the impression that any of this is optional?
What are you not telling me?
Stay away from my family.
Get him. That's not how this is gonna play out.
All right, let's talk about it. We got to talk about some winners. We got to talk about some losers of the NWSL draft. Listen, when we did our live recap from Philly, we talked a lot about that first round because it was so epic in the movement and the trades and everything about that, from Alyssa Thompson making history, going number 1 to Angel City, the 18-year-old senior out of California, and Gotham trading with Kansas City for number 2, and Michelle Cooper going number 2, Emily Madrill going number 3. Shout out to the top 3 there in the NWSL draft. But I think we should maybe just take it team by team a little bit, Lisa, and what we thought and how they navigated their draft days. We'll just start. Let's just go alphabetical, no particular order. Angel City, what did you think of them and their draft day? They are the winners of the Alyssa Thompson sweepstakes, I guess. Sort of kind of came on really, really quickly, it felt like, right? All of a sudden, yes, Alyssa Thompson was considering going pro. She wasn't exactly registered. Then all of a sudden there was rumors swirling around about them making a move for the number 1 pick. Then they actually did it, but she still wasn't registered. There were all these parts, but they walk away with the number 1 pick in Alyssa Thompson. And they also address the team need, right? With goalkeeper as well. So what would you grade them? Coming out winners? Are they coming out losers?
I think that, not winners, not losers. I hate to start off that way, but yeah, they traded and they made some really impressive strategic moves leading up to the draft so they could get that number 1 pick. And they wanted Alyssa Thompson, and that's what they got. So I think in Angel City's mind, they are complete winners. That's what they wanted. They wanted the number 1 pick. They wanted the 18-year-old. They wanted her to stay in California. We talked about it in our mock draft about how Angel City was a team that I think had a lot of expectations on them in 2022 to do well, to exceed, to have all these investors, to make the playoffs, right? Like every team wants to do that, make the playoffs and wins. But I think with Angel City, they had unrealistic expectations on themselves to do that. And they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't succeed maybe as well as they wanted to on the pitch. So getting a player like Alyssa Thompson definitely strengthens their roster. I mean, this is a player that has 2 international caps with the U.S. senior team, right? She's going to boost them up and do that. But throughout doing that, they lost one of their picks. So Angel City only ended up with 2 picks throughout the NWSL draft. And I think that's an area where they lose a couple points for me, because they could have had 3 picks. They could have maybe bolstered up their midfield a little bit, up their front line. I'm interested to see. I mean, this is one of those things, as with a lot of draft picks, you don't know until you actually see them playing in contest. Is Alyssa Thompson going to start their first game of the regular season on March 25th? I have no idea. I could see it going either way at that point. So, I mean, I give them like a B, right? Like a middle of the road. They didn't completely win. They weren't the best club in this draft, but they also didn't completely lose because they got what they wanted in their number 1 draft pick.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it like that and sort of targeting the things that they wanted to walk away with on draft day, they accomplished those things. And I'm with you. I gave them a B grade as well. I think I might have gone B minus. I have my actual grades posted up on .com, so check it out on CBS Sports. But I'm with you. I think when they made those multiple moves to get into that spot because they wanted to select this player, and they also tried to address a targeted area, with the goalkeeper position. So coming out of this draft with the number 1 overall pick that you wanted to go ahead and draft, but also coming out with, Angelina Anderson out of UC Berkeley for, goalkeeping, to just add to the depth of that. I think I'm with you. Does it feel like a draw, right? Are we going win, lose, draw in these? Do we want to include that as well? I'll allow it. I won't let you, I won't let you be pigeonholed to just 1 or 2, right? I'll let you go ahead and do it. Let's keep going.
We make our own rules here. We make our own rules here.
That's part of having your own show, right? You get to do that. Let's keep going in alphabetical order here. I want to hear your thoughts on the Chicago Red Stars, because this is a team that we talked about when we were talking about team needs across the league, that this is one of a handful of teams where we said, hey, this is a team that has to utilize the draft in order to help continue to flesh out their roster. What did you think of their draft day?
I think Chicago, with 4 picks throughout the draft, 3 in the first 2 rounds, they had a lot of potential to pick up where they need. And starting at their number 7th pick, Penelope Hocking, the forward out of Penn State, this was a really good grab. I'm really happy about this one. I think that'll help Chicago in their front line, right? You can't rely on a player like Mallory Swanson, formerly Pew, to do all of the work, especially in a World Cup year. Then they go ahead and they get Grace Yochum and Ali Schlegel, also out of Penn State. So you got 2 Penn Staters. I think that also helps a little bit under Chris Petroselli to have 2 players that have formerly played with each other for a number of years. But when you look at the overall roster for Chicago, they lost a lot of midfielders. And yes, they gained some midfielders, right? Like you could throw Yochum in the midfield. You can throw some of those players in the midfield, but they're more attacking minded players. I wanted to see them pick up a really good defensive midi or a really good center back that if Chris Petroselli continues to play with 3 back, you can throw a center back on the left, right, or the center of that 3 center back role. And he didn't do that. He stuck more with the attacking side of the game. So that was something that I was a little not too proud to see from Chicago, but I mean, I really like Penelope Hocking in the first round. That's a huge grab for Chicago. But you, as our resident Chicago encyclopedia here, what do you think about this? You're going to be the one watching them week in and week out in person. Yeah. What do you think of this?
Listen, I think going into this draft with 3 picks and walking out with 4 selections, I think is really good for the Chicago
Yeah.
Red Sox team, especially as we had them pegged as a team that needed to make their picks. We were like, don't trade away for just like some random allocation money. And I mean, unless they have a for sure signing that they're trying to get into the team, but they needed to utilize this draft for bodies. They really needed to sort of walk out of this draft with 4 players, going in with only 3 picks. I think was already a net positive for them. I also think them being able to walk away with that 4th player being Sophie Jones out of Duke, I think is really good. We're talking about 2018 Gatorade Player of the Year, coming off of a pretty strong senior season. I think there were some folks surprised that she dropped all the way to the 4th round. So I not only am I impressed with sort of how they started their draft and getting somebody like a Hawking, someone that we had amongst really like the top 5 forwards available going into this draft. So they walk away with Hawking, who, depending who you talk to, is probably could possibly be one of the
Yeah.
more quote unquote NWSL ready forwards. Heard a lot of that
I
being thrown
agree.
around Hockey on the draft floor. So to sort of start off and open up their draft with that type of attacking player, to sort of close it off with this type of midfielder in the 4th round, I thought was pretty good. I think upon like first reaction, I was like high C, like C plus, maybe B minus. Now that I've had some time to sit in it, I think again grades are going to be tough because we're going to have to see where these players slot in and how they can
Exactly.
produce. But this is also a franchise that fielded like 7 different first-year players in 2022, and we saw all of these first-year players make an impact in some capacity. So what is that going to
Yep.
mean for those players who are now going to go and pursue a second year in NWSL? Where are you going to see these players? Where does the Jill Aguilera fit coming out of a 2022? They utilized her a lot at wingback. That was something that was asked of her that she was unfamiliar with. Are they going to slot her more inside in an effort to move things around in other areas? So we'll see. I think for just walking out of this with getting more players than they had anticipated, I think is positive for them. But we'll have to wait and see what the production looks like for the team coming out during the regular season. Keeping things alphabetical, Houston Dash. We touched on their big trade already, but when you're looking at the overall draft day for Houston, what are you grading them?
I mean, they got Diana Ordonez. This is a player in her rookie year that scored 12 goals. She went on a run. She really lifted up North Carolina's front line last year and all of their attacking efforts. So because of that, Houston starts out at like an A++ with what they could do in order to do that. But because of that, Houston had some late round picks. They had 2 in the 2nd, and then 1 each in the 3rd and the 4th round. But when you look at who they were able to pick up, Sophie Hurst, the 20th overall pick, so in the 2nd round, and then the 22nd in Jalissa Harris out of South Carolina. Yeah. Harris was a player that for you and I, we had her higher on our draft list about what she was going to do, how she was going to contribute in this draft. And out of South Carolina in the SEC, this Jalissa Harris was a forward that I thought was going to go a lot higher than she did. But I think for Houston to be able to get a player like Harris that late in the 2nd round was a massive grab for them. They're really strengthening up what they've been able to do. And then also you look at their other pick and Sophie Hurst in that 2nd round out of Harvard. This is a midfielder, more of a midi player. And I really like this grab. So I think Diana Ordonez, though, pushes them to the top. I think Houston did really well throughout this draft with what they were given, and with their new head coach, right, and Sam Hyatt being able to kind of bolster up their roster as much as they could.
Yeah, I have them coming out winners in this one as well. I think turning that 1st-round pick into Diana Ordonez essentially is massive for them. I can only anticipate that playing at home in front of friends and family in a comfortable setting is going to help her in her sophomore season, because again, we're we're looking at that. Sometimes players suffer from a sophomore slump, but I think she's already perhaps setting herself up to find success, right? I also think it helped targeted an area of need. We were curious if they were going to go with an attacking player out of this draft in light of someone like Nichelle Prince suffering an ACL injury in November on international duty. What was that frontline attack going to look like? What could it look like? And instead of going with an attacker out of college, they're going with this now second-year player in Diana Ordonez. So I think that's a massive upgrade for them. And I'm with you on Jalissa Harris as well. They did really well, I think, Houston, to go ahead and shore up some things defensively. They re-signed Price, like they extended her deal. They want to possibly have her be that counterpart, that pair for Katie Naughton. But it's important to have depth in those areas, and I think having a defender like Jalissa Harris is gonna help target that. So I have them coming out winners in the draft as well. Let's talk about Kansas City Current. I think maybe we're gonna keep the winners rolling here. Kansas City Current, no strangers to having a big draft day. Remembered when they were first on the scene, they smashed the allocation draft day money record. I remember when the first move for allocation money was made, it was between Chicago and it was between Utah Rose, and it was for like $80,000 for a first round pick. And now that's like smashed out of the water. And we've got Kansas City Current making the leap into the number 2 spot with the trade. We've talked about that trade a little bit already. You got them as winners or losers coming out of this draft?
Kansas City won this draft. They really did. I mean, you really have to weigh the loss and the gain for Kansas City Current. They lost Lynn Williams. They lost Elise Bennett, to OL Reign and Williams going to Gotham. But when you look at the picks they had, 4 in the first 2 rounds, 1 in the third, and then 3 picks in the 4th round, Kansas City had so many picks. And I think they utilize them so well. Of course, they make that massive trade, sending Lynn Williams to Gotham to get the sophomore out of Duke forward, Michelle Cooper, at that number 2 overall pick. This is a massive grab for them. It kind of reflects the sentiments we talked about with Angel City. They wanted Alyssa Thompson. They knew she was going to go first. So Angel City did what they could to get that number 1 pick. Same goes for Kansas City. They wanted Michelle Cooper. And if you know the number 1 pick is going to go to Alyssa Thompson, and it's pretty much been solidified by Angel City, you've got to go for that number 2 pick. That's what they did. And they end up getting Cooper. I think she's going to be a really big asset to Kansas City. But you look at the rest, the next 3 picks for Kansas City, 10th in the first round, and they go with Alexis Spanstra out of Virginia. This is a massive player that I think could really fit well into Matt Potter's system. A tenacious player, understands where she can be on the pitch, can also play a variety of roles. And when you look at Matt Potter and what he does with his roster, he throws players anywhere, just to see their strengths and what they're going to do. Then they end up getting Gabrielle Robinson out of West Virginia and Jordan Silkowitz out of Iowa State. Top picks, and that's just 18, right? They had 4 picks in the first 18 picks. That's massive. I think Kansas City utilized and capitalized on what they could do in this draft, and they did an incredible job. Oh, yeah, and they also got Debinha. I know that's free agency, and that's a different story, but Kansas City, they did fantastic. They won this draft, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. They were already the team going into this draft at the moment with 7 picks. They were one of the team. I think they were the team with the most at that point. Yeah. So to know that they had already made these moves prior to going into the draft, you're just like, okay, well, maybe they're gonna look to perhaps trade out of the draft. Like they're sitting pretty. That was not the case. So not only did they kick off their draft week by announcing the free agency signing of Debinha, they go ahead and they make a move for that number 2 spot and nab Michelle Cooper. The fact that they closed out that first round draft with Alexis Spanstra is huge. I'm so glad you mentioned that because this was a player I remember on mock draft boards in last year's draft when there was that waiver for the NCAA waiver where players had the option to declare back and close out their senior seasons with their collegiate teams, and therefore basically rights to any player were like wide open. So you could draft a player and they may or may not have a reported case. So this was a player like our draft boards didn't actually declare, but here she was for this year's draft and was rated as a potential first rounder, and was selected number 10 overall into Kansas City. I'm just kind of like, geez, like they're gonna keep winning this thing. We'll see how it looks with the rest of these picks. And then they kept making them moving forward. I mean, we're not even talking about their picks in the third and the fourth round where they picked up, Mekhi McKinnon, the defender out of Washington State. So they're like adding depth in different areas. And I think if you're a first year player and you're just starting off your pro career and you get the opportunity to do that in a market or a franchise like Kansas City that is doing so much for its players in terms of its facilities, that's got to be something that really, really excites you, because we've heard from all their free agency signings and their re-signings that's one of the things that has been most lucrative in terms of making that decision to play with Kansas City. So they're absolutely winners for me as well coming out of this draft. Let's stay alphabetical. We're with K with Kansas City Current. So let's move on to N with New Jersey, New York, Gotham FC. Lisa, I've got Gotham FC as winners in this one as well. It's thinking about this now with a couple days removed from the draft. This was a draft class with a lot of talent within it. So it almost sort of feels like a lot of the teams could have possibly come out of this draft as winners just because of the depth of talent that there was in this draft class. But I think when you add in that X factor of the moves made, the trades made, how things got shifted around, when you incorporate that as part of a draft day grade, I've got Gotham coming out winners in this one as well.
I kind of think about that too. I think if you asked me this Thursday night, and I maybe even said this on Thursday night after the draft, that there wasn't that much with Gotham that was impressing me. However, in hindsight, you look at the moves that they made and the trades that happened. They lost the number 2 pick to Kansas City, but they gained Lynn Williams plus the little money, and they still had the 4th overall pick. With only 2 picks in the draft, you want to stay top 5. So the fact that they lost number 2, but they were able to retain number 4 in the pick, that's really good. I think that Yael Averbuch-West did a great job there with kind of finagling her way around that, because they were able to get out of Florida State University, Jenna Nightswanger. This is a player that can make an immediate impact with Gotham, and that's what they need right now. We talked about the moves that Gotham had made in the offseason, whether with free agency or who they were picking up, and we talked about the front line. And the changes that Gotham has made, they've already done a lot of them. And so they didn't have that much work to do during this draft, right? They picked up Kelly O'Hara. They have Chrissy Mewis coming back for a second season. They've re-signed McCall Zerboni in the midfield. They've got Victoria Pickett coming back in the midfield. And then they end up getting Lynn Williams to kind of bolster up that front line, along with someone like Smith in that front line. So I think that Gotham, they did well with the 2 picks that they were given, one in the first round and then one in the 4th round, I believe. This is the best that they can do. So yeah, I think I give them a top winning grade at the end of this, because Jenna Nightswanger is a player that's going to make an immediate impact. And that's what Gotham needed, right? I think that for Gotham to have 2 picks, one in the first round at number 4, and you get a player that you can start immediately, is better than maybe having 5 picks and going with some average players, not average, but talent wise, that you need to develop a little bit and can't start right away. So Gotham winner in my book.
Yeah, same for me. For all the reason that you have mentioned already. Look, Jenna Nightswanger, I think, was one of these combo breaker type of players. I think she was busting mock drafts all throughout the soccer space. When that final player registration list dropped, the deadline had passed. They updated the list. Boom, you saw Jenna Nightswanger available, the midfielder out of Florida State. And it broke a bunch of mock drafts. You had to restructure some things. It's like, is this a player that can actually go, top 3, depending on what some of these teams are targeting in terms of their actual wants and needs going into the 2023 season. So I think Nightswanger at number 4 was almost just the icing on the cake in terms of the moves that they had made to get themselves there, because this was a team that had the number 2 pick. Well, actually, they had the number 1 pick. Then they had the number 2 pick, and then they traded with Racing to get the number 4 pick. It was a series of trades to ensure that they remained in the top 5, and they're walking out with a top talent in Neischwanger. And I'm curious to see how they're going to work her in to the bigger picture of all things Gotham, because they've also, announced the re-signing of McCall Zerboni out of free agency for a 1-year deal. Again, we know that they've got, Yasmin Ryan and Christy Mewis, so
Yasmin
there's
Ryan.
I'm interested to see where they are going to look and play some of these players. Again, it's a World Cup year. We'll see. We're likely to see some of these players who are considered depth players get some meaningful time in a season like this. And I think we could see it in Gotham as well. So winners for me when we're talking about players coming out of the draft. We're staying with the letter N for North Carolina Courage. Lisa, you and I were going live and we were talking about that first round. North Carolina Courage was a team similar to last year's draft. They had 3 picks coming out of this draft, but they also lost a ton coming out of this draft. We're talking about, you mentioned Dabinia already in free agency, their actual draft day trade with Ordonez going to Houston Dash. And then we were like, okay, well, we have to see what they do with those 3 picks then. What is it going to look like? What are the areas that they're going to target? So for this one, when I actually was putting grades on things, I went with letters. So I've got them in the C range. So that's not exactly a winner. I guess it's not exactly a loser. But I think when we're talking about the available talent, right, that we were talking about what's coming out of this draft class, we were curious with some of the picks that they went with.
I mean, I'm going to be honest with that. I think with North Carolina having 4 picks in the first round, it's quality over quantity. And in terms of where those locations were, 6, 8, 9, and 11, I don't think North Carolina did as well as they could have in this draft. They lose Dabinia, they lose Diana Ordonez. You have to shore up with experience and players that can start immediately. North Carolina had the pick ahead of Chicago. They could have gone for Penelope Hawking. That's one that I talked about it when we talked about Chicago. Chicago won because they got someone like a Penelope Hawking. North Carolina could have done that. That's a 5th-year player that's played in 2 different conferences, understands how to win Big Ten championships. Penelope out of Penn State is a player that can start immediately with your team. And instead, they go with Olivia Wingate out of Notre Dame, which was a little bit shocking for me. Wingate was lower on my list in terms of best available and where she would go. Still a tremendous player, but I think that those are some of the things that I'm questioning a little bit. Not at all the quality of the player that Sean Nahas went with. I mean, we've talked about it. Only time will tell, right? Maybe these are the types of players that he's looking for specifically. But even Alextra Spanstra out of Virginia,
on the board.
she went number 10. She was still on the board for 3 of North Carolina's picks. 3 of North Carolina's picks, and they didn't go with her. So those were some things that I was a little concerned about. I mean, Izzy D'Aquila was still on the board out of Santa Clara, but I'm okay with that. And North Carolina didn't need that type of player. So I just think that North Carolina could have done better with where their picks fell, all being in the first round. Maybe it's like you've got champagne problems, right? You're just picking of too many at that point. But I don't know. I would not have left Spanstra on the board or Hawking at that point if I was North Carolina.
No, I'm with you. I think in our mock draft, we had Spencer going to North Carolina. And I think if North Carolina is this franchise that sees themselves in a bit of a rebuilding process, I also was of the mindset that, well, perhaps they want to go not only with best, some of the best talent available on the board at some of these selections, but perhaps versatility within some of these player selections. And I think Spancher was one of those players, right? Someone that you can slot along that front line, drop lower if you need to. And again, was available at each of these selections, but they didn't go with her. I think Clara Robbins could be a steal, I think, in this one. But again, I think it just depends on when and where and how they anticipate using her. I think we also have to look back at last year's draft as well. We thought that they won the draft in for 2022 season, but it's really Ordonez that kind of had a bit of that breakout for them. Are they going to continue developing, an Emily Gray? Are they going to continue development of Bodie? I think that's where that next step is going to come in for me, that I'm going to be looking at. So you're making these picks. There is talent there. What's the development look like? What's the progress look like for these players? And are they getting it, at North Carolina? So let's keep moving with the letter O. We've got OL Reign here. We talked about some of the trades that they made already. I'm going with them as a winner in this one, Lisa. I liked the trades. Laura Harvey is no stranger to making trades in the draft. She prefers to have the record shows that she prefers to have the experienced player on her roster versus actually making those selections out of the draft and developing those players. But look, closing out draft night with a later trade in the evening and a bit of a blockbustery trade at that, to acquire Emily Sonnet on top of having two extra selections out of the draft. I kind of gave them a low B. I went with a little bit of a B minus, but I think you could consider that a win.
Yeah, I think that a B minus is a win, right? Like I got B minuses in school, I was a winner. I think for OL Reign, I think you said it. You said it right. Laura Harvey wants experience. She wants players that are already developed, already have that foundation, and she can just build on a little bit. We saw her get Elise Bennett and then Emily Sonnet in this one. Now, Elise Bennett, this is only going to be her second year in the league, but she was a Rookie of the Year potential last year. This is a player that did tremendous work for Kansas City, so I think that's a really good grab for OL Reign. And with only 2 picks in this draft and them coming a little bit later than usual, I think for her to get Shea Holmes out of Washington, right? That's a local player in Washington that's then staying in Seattle and continuing to play. That's a defender. I mean, I'm not foreseeing that we'll see Shea Holmes get a lot of time, but the building process is there for Laura Harvey. And perhaps this is a long-term investment. That's kind of what you have to think about when Laura Harvey is at the draft table, that someone like Holmes is going to be there for a number of years, depending on how she does in immediate impact in preseason. Perhaps she won't see much time on the field, here or there, get some minutes, but to be playing alongside the back line, you look at who she'll be with, Sofia Huerta. Now you've got Emily Sonnet in that back line. I think, OL Reign did well with what they were given and for what Laura Harvey wants, right? We know what Laura Harvey wants, and she wants the experience, and that's going to come from trades, not from draft picks.
No, I hear you, but I like the picks that they made. I think the local pick in Shea Holmes out of Washington Soccer, I think is good for them. I liked the pick of Natalie Viggiano. I chuckled a little bit and I laughed and I said that's a Scott Parkinson pick. He's already making moves as the co-head coach there at OL Reign, going with the Big Ten scouting during his time in the Midwest, going with Viggiano out of University of Wisconsin, also the sister of Marissa Viggiano. So I think cool to sort of see those picks kind of come out. But I got them as winners in this draft, both with the moves that they made and the players that they ultimately selected out of this one. Let's keep it moving and issue out some winners and some loser statuses. Let's go with Orlando Pride. I liked their draft day. I think going into this draft, folks were wondering if we were going to hear an announcement. Were they going to be the winners of the Dabinia sweepstakes? But turns out they missed out on that. And perhaps, maybe folks were wondering if they were like walking in with heads hanging low, but that is not the case. I think they are not just winners, but big winners in this draft. I think they had specific areas of needs that they had to target coming into this draft. And I think they're walking out with some really, really good picks. Of course, we have to talk about that top pick. They ended up going with defender Emily Madrill in this one. And I think that alone, even if that was their only pick, that would have given them a winning status in this one for us.
Yeah, 5 picks for Orlando coming into this draft. And that same day, they lost Maggie Doherty-Howard out of the midfield. She went to San Diego. And Orlando, it was almost a rebuild year last year. Throughout 2022, without having Marta, they lost Sydney LaRue last year. It was a year to kind of reset. They had some coaching changes. Now they've got Seb Hines, who spent the end of 2022 with this team, and he could build on the roster that he knows, the personnel he knows. And number 3 overall, they had initially number 3 and number 4 Orlando. And when we did our like preview of the draft, I wanted Orlando to stay at the top. They needed players and they needed top talent, and they did. They traded away 1 to Gotham in that number 4 spot, but they kept their number 3 pick and getting Emily Madrill, the professional already, formerly with Florida State. She's played professionally with Sweden over the last couple of years, or the last year, excuse me. This is an immediate impact player. Then in the second round, 21 overall pick, Messiah Bright out of TCU, forward Bright. This is a player that you and I both thought would go much higher. When we're talking about North Carolina, 4 picks in the 4th round, this is another player they could have gone with that maybe would make an immediate impact, but they left it to Orlando. Bright is staying in the southern half of the country, going from TCU over to Orlando. I mean, for Seb Hines, that's a really, really great grab. And then they still had 3 more picks. So I agree. I think Orlando had a really good draft out of UNC. Tori Hansen, Summer Yates, Kristen Scott. These are players that can come in and do wonders for Orlando. And that's really what they needed, right? It was a rebuild year last year. So now how do they continue on that rebuild? I think Madrill is someone that we could see a lot this year.
Yeah, I think the fact that they were also able to get some of that talent in later rounds, I think is a real steal for this team as well. Yes, they went with Madrill, probably the highest rated defender going into this draft, but to pick up Messiah Bright to add to their attacking core, but also Tori Hansen, the defender out of North Carolina, who we also had going a bit higher in this draft as well, I think is also a steal. Selecting her 25th overall, I think is good. So we definitely were looking at that attacking line. We were looking at the middle third. We were looking at the back line. We were like, listen, if they could target any of these areas, that'll be a win for Orlando Pride. But the fact that they are coming out with a couple of pretty good defenders and a good attacking piece, I think is really, really, really good for them. We're giving them the winning grade as well. Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about Portland Thorns and how they went ahead and tackled this draft. I've got them as winners just with some of the moves that they were making going into this draft. Part of that blockbuster 4-team trade that took place ahead of the draft, and finding themselves not just with the 12th pick overall going into this draft, but then found themselves with a higher pick, kind of right at number 5. So how are you grading them coming out of this one, Lisa?
I think Portland did well. I mean, as NWSL champions in 2022, to kind of finagle their way into a number 5 pick, kudos. Great job. Great job by Portland, because, hey, that's not easy to do. A lot of times you have to give up a lot in order to get that. And I think that Portland didn't even give up that much to get that number 5 pick. And they go with defender out of Alabama, Reina Reyes. This is massive for Portland. They've got to strengthen up that back line. And this is how they're going to do it. This is another team that in a World Cup year is going to lose a lot of top talent. And I think with 3 picks in this draft, all in the first 2 rounds, it was a pretty good night for Portland. They end up getting Reyes 5th overall, and then 12th overall, Izzy Diakila out of Santa Clara. This is another really good grab, right? This is a player that still on the board at number 12. Why not pick it up for Portland? Yeah, I'm pleased with what Portland did and how they were able to do this. I mean, this is another team that, right, is coming off of a championship year, and how the draft works in America is you get the last pick. You get the very last pick because that's how it works. You just won. You don't need all the top talent. But for Portland, this is a team that is really stacked. Their roster is really full, and they didn't need that much, but they were still able to get some big pieces that I think will add to the roster, especially the training practices. And I think we'll see Reyes in game minutes.
I do too. I think this is the year, like I said, for a lot of players to get some looks and to make some debuts. Look, I don't know how you go into this draft as NWSL champions and somehow walk away even stronger than you already were going into this draft. I mean, my goodness, to be able to pick up Reina Reyes again. We're talking about in our mock draft episode going into this draft. Like, who were the top forwards going into this draft? Who were the top defenders going into this draft? And everybody was talking about Emily Madrigal, and everybody else was talking about Reina Reyes. And the fact that they walk away with this player as the number 5 overall pick, and then also get a player like Izzy Aquila in the 12th selection overall. It's huge pickups for them coming out of this draft. I also have them as winners. Racing Louisville FC. Don't know if I have them in winners in this one, Lisa. Unclear.
Yeah, I think it's hard. TBD on Racing Louisville. The grades have yet to come in. I don't think they did that well. I'm going to be honest. 4 picks in this draft, 2 in the second, 2 in the third round, and back to back.
Paige Monahan's a big.
They got Paige Monahan. You have to remember that they got Paige Monahan earlier in the day, and I think that's a really good grab. So that ups their grade a little bit. But their first pick at number 16 overall, and then number 17, Kayla Fisher out of Ohio State forward, and then Brianna Martinez out of Notre Dame. I'm just, I don't know, not great considering who was still on the board at that point. I'm looking at Messiah Bray. I'm looking at Jalissa Harris. I'm looking at even Sophie Hurst out of Harvard. These are other players that I think could have made different impacts with this club. But in the third round, they ended up getting 2 picks. They had at least a break, 1 team break in between them. That was the thing. Racing Louisville, their picks were all back-to-back, right? Back-to-back in the second round, and then 29 and 31 in the third round. But they got Riley Mattingly Parker out of Alabama. This is a player I'm really high on, a forward for Alabama. She's gritty. She's tenacious. She's got a nose for the goal. She honestly kind of plays similarly to Paige Monahan. I'm going to use that analogy because Parker and Monahan have that relentless effort where they're going to chase down every single ball till the edge. They're a little smaller in stature and they're going to fight, but they still have got a great physical presence on the field. So maybe that's the type of player that Kim Bjorkegren is looking to acquire at his team. But I'm going to give meh to Racing Louisville.
All right, fair enough. We'll just put that in the loser category, just to break it down. We gotta give it to somebody. San Diego Wave FC. You know what? Maybe this one is also TBD, but not in the sense where they're coming out as losers in this draft, because I actually felt like they were going into this draft already as winners. So we're looking at a San Diego Wave FC side that were going into their second ever NWSL draft, and they made a move with Gotham to jump up in the order, right? Had the first selection in that second round, which was smart because a lot of talent fell to that round. But this is also a franchise that went into this draft maybe didn't necessarily have a ton of areas that they needed to target because of how they've been navigating their offseason. I mean, they've made some really great re-signings of some of their players on their roster. They included Danny Colaprico and landed her in free agency. We're talking about a team that hit the jackpot in last year's draft in Naomi Girma, going with her over Jalen Howell, and it paid massive dividends. And I think it's going to be one of those generational type of players that's going to hopefully be able to stick around with California team for quite some time. But, adding a midfielder in Sierra Ng out of Stanford, I think is big, going with the local kid as well. And then picking up an extra goalkeeper, I thought was pretty good. Again, World Cup year, you're going to want to have these areas of depth for the team going forward. So I don't know if I would necessarily consider them losers out of this draft, but it's only because I don't necessarily felt like they had a ton of areas of need to target within the draft specifically.
I agree. I think that there's more going on than head coach Casey Stoney lets on with her plan and what she's doing. We saw that throughout 2022. She was always so confident in her team, but never showed her cards, never let anyone really know what the plan was. And this is a team that ends up going on to the quarterfinal of the NWSL playoffs and continuing to win and beat teams and get a first round home game in the playoffs. And like you mentioned with Naomi Girma, this is a breakout player. They go again. Their first pick in this draft ends up being in the second round. The first pick in the second round, 13th overall. And they go with another Stanford product, the midfielder Sierra Enge out of Stanford. This is a big grab. I saw it all over social media with Girma, Alex Morgan giving shout outs to Sierra, saying that we're so excited to have you, keeping that player in California. And I think that with Casey Stoney, there are so many things that we won't know until we see them unfolding and see what the plan is for a player like that. They ended up having 3 picks in this one, and as you said, they didn't need a lot. So they end up getting another player, Lauren Brzezicki, out of UCLA, and then Giovanna DiMarco out of Wake Forest. But that was the 45th pick, 33rd and 45th pick, respectively. I think that you're exactly right. They didn't need much coming into it, but it's a win for Casey Stoney with the places that she was on the board and the players that were still available with who she could get. I think it's a long-term game plan for Casey Stoney.
I'm with you on that. We've got one final team to issue some grades for. Let's talk about the Washington Spirit. Lisa, Washington Spirit, I left confused. I was befuddled. I was baffled. I was all of it. I was kind of like, okay, here's Washington Spirit. This was a team. When we talked about some of our previous draft episodes, we included them as one of the teams in NWSL who needed to go into this draft and utilize it to help flesh out their roster and obtain some players. So it's confusing in the sense where I feel like they accomplished that goal. Mm-hmm. They go into this draft, right? And they only go in with a certain amount of picks, and they're walking out with a handful of players now at this point. So when you're looking at quantity, perhaps they achieve their goal there. But what does it mean? At what cost? And I think that's where we're kind of fixated on a little bit.
I agree, because it's kind of same story as North Carolina. To me, it's quality over quantity. And when you've got 6 picks in this NWSL draft, 4 of them in the 3rd round, you have to go with some of your best available, because Washington has a good team. That was like the most confusing part of 2022, why they weren't able to produce, because you've got Anna Helferty, you've got Trinity Rodman, Ashley Hatch, Ashley Sanchez, Andy Sullivan in the midfield. They had Kelly O'Hara and Emily Sonnet in the back line, Aubrey Kingsbury in goal. They've got so many pieces, but they couldn't produce. And I would want to grab some lethal forwards that could go in there and shake things up. Now Washington does have a lot of forwards. They don't need that many in that role. They needed to bolster up defensively. You lose Kelly O'Hara, you lose Emily Sonnet. Your goalkeeping position is a little slim at this point. That's where I wanted to see Washington really, really pick up players. And getting Nicole Douglas out of Arizona State, the Chelsea product, as their first pick. Yeah, this is a good pick, but when you look who's still on the board, I don't know. There may be some other players I would have gone with at this point. I like the pick in Douglas, but what about like Riley Mattingly Parker? That pick didn't come until 31st for Racing Louisville. I would have loved to see that go for Washington. But under Mark Parsons, this is a new team for him. He's trying to establish himself there. I don't know. I don't think it was that great for Washington Spirit. Given the picks that they had, 3 of them high in the 3rd round, they could have had a little bit more depth, especially defensively, getting more experienced players.
Yeah, I think I was a little surprised that they went, that they targeted a goalkeeper, I think, as early as they did with that was like their first pick in the draft. So you've got the trade chatter, and then you're like, okay, who are you going to target with this pick? And you're like, it's a goalkeeper. Okay, and I'm not saying that that's not an area that they needed to help flesh out in light of losing like a Devin Kerr, and you're looking at Aubrey Kingsbury and how does that goalkeeping unit sort of look for the Spirit moving forward. But I think with the picks that they had laid out within their 3rd and their 4th, and that's a position that they perhaps could have targeted with an even later pick already anticipated. But perhaps they're really, really high on Bosselman and wanted to ensure that they utilize that selection for that moment. But yeah, when we're talking like winners and losers, I'm not too sure if I've got them in the winners column in this one. I think if you're someone that's just looking at quantity over quality, then maybe you've got them as winners. But yeah, still a lot of TBD going on when it comes to some of the picks that were made throughout the 2023 draft. But that's a wrap. We're closing the book on the 2023 NWSL draft. It was great doing all these episodes in the build up to the event. And now we're turning the page because we've got to look ahead to the regular season, because preseason, believe it or not, starts much, much quicker than anyone can anticipate. We're going to have so much more about the NWSL as always. We want to thank you all for listening to us here on Attacking Third. Download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us too. Make sure you subscribe at youtube.com/attacking3rd to be able to get alerts whenever we go live. Leave us some comments. We want to hear from you. We always love to hear from you. For Sandra and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.